Hey everybody, welcome back to the program. This week's guest is Tabitha Fritz, and we talk all about cannabis and its wonderful properties and how it saves lives. She resides in Canada right now, and a very, very, very self-starting person, I must say. Started her own cannabis company, and continues to educate in the cannabis industry. And I had a very lovely conversation with her. She's such a kind person, and I would love to have her back on the podcast. I hope you all get as much information as you can as I did out of this episode, and I will see you on the next one. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So I read your bio, and I really am excited to hear your story on how you got into the cannabis industry and where you see it going. So my first question would be is, how did you get into cannabis to start with? Not the industry itself, just into cannabis.
That is a very good question. So I will tell you. I first got into weed when I was around 30. Mm-hmm. So before that, I grew up in Michigan in the States, and like the people that I hung out with really did not consume weed. Like it just wasn't a part of anyone's life that I knew. And so then when I was about, I think 19, my girlfriend at the time, my friend, she was dating a guy who smoked weed, and she was like, "Hey, we should try smoking weed." And I was like, "All right, let's try it." And so yeah, we did it. And then we ate like a 5-pound bag of frozen strawberries and a whole tub of Cool Whip in like the next 2 hours, like you do the first time you smoke weed. And I was like, oh, this is great. Like, this is fun. But I didn't really have access to it. It wasn't, it didn't become part of my life at that point. So I was like, okay, that's my weed experience. Fine, whatever. And then I went about my life and, did other things with my life. And then when I was about 30, I met my husband. He's now my husband. And I met him. He was from Canada, and I was living in New Jersey at the time. And he loved weed. Like, I think he probably loves weed more than he loves our kids. Like, he really loves weed, right? Like, he's been consuming it for a long time. And so when I met him, I wasn't consuming weed, and I had just been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Mm-hmm. I was going through a divorce. My life was really challenging. And I had been to the doctor, and I had said to the doctor, like, I can't catch my breath when I'm breathing. Like, I feel like I'm sighing all the time. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, that's anxiety. And I was like,
welcome.
Oh,
yeah,
right. Like, oh, I don't think I like this. I'm not a fan of this feeling. And he was like, oh, here's some Xanax. This is what people take in order to not feel that feeling anymore. And I was like, oh, okay. My doctor told me this is what I should take, so I guess I should take it. And it was like, maybe it works well for some people, Xanax, but for me, like, I just lost entire days of my life. Like, I just couldn't remember what had happened. And maybe I wasn't feeling anxious, but I would feel a lot anxious later on when I couldn't remember what happened, 2 days before, like, what's going on here. Mm-hmm. So, I was taking this medication that had been prescribed to me by my doctor, but it was, I was feeling not anxious, but it was not improving the quality of my life. It was making it worse. And so that's the situation that I was in when I met my husband. And he, I told him about my experience, and he was like, have you ever tried weed? And I was like, well, not really. And he was like, you should probably try weed and see how that works for you.
Yeah.
So, right. Like, and then I did, I started consuming cannabis then, and I was able to like completely stop taking Xanax. I found that weed, I would consume it at night after I'd had a whole day of experience of life, of living life. And then I would get home, and then my anxiety would really start to ramp up. So then I would have some weed, and it was like, it would just, all of a sudden I would have this space available to me where I could take a step back and go, okay, what's really causing your anxiety? What's really going on here? What are you really feeling? What's going on here? So, I credit cannabis with really being the tool that helped me heal myself from my anxiety disorder, because it suddenly provided the space for me to take a step back and go, okay, like what's really going on with me? What's really happening in my life that I'm feeling this way? And it was, it was such an incredible and powerful tool for me to become healthier and to heal myself. And then I just wanted to tell everyone else about it so that they could heal themselves with it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, I was having a big woe is life kind of feeling. Woe is me, like where am I going in this life? And I remember my friend rolled me a couple joints and I smoked one and it was just like, I think I found my key. I think I found
Yeah.
my key. So I just snapped right out of it and it helped me a lot too. It really did.
Yeah.
And so where did you go from there? So in your notes here, the Fritz Cannabis Company is you are a founder and former CEO. So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So knowing how much cannabis helped me, I wanted to share that with other people as much as I could. And so I kind of got the opportunity to do that in, let's see, it was around 2016. So I'm living in Toronto at the time. My husband's from Toronto. That's where I live now. And we were in Toronto, and they started opening up a whole bunch of these sort of underground dispensaries for
Mm-hmm.
weed, right? They weren't legal, but they were open all over the city. And people became accustomed to being able to access cannabis through these different dispensaries. And so then the police in Toronto did there was something called Project Claudia, and they came around and they sort of locked down all the illegal dispensaries. They raided all of them, arrested a bunch of people, confiscated all the product,
What?
and then yeah, because it was before it was legal, right? So
Oh,
cannabis
okay,
hadn't been
yeah.
legalized yet. So the outcome of that was sort of that the cops in Toronto kind of said, like, out of the side of their mouth, like, you can kind of have these dispensaries open, but we don't want anyone to sell edibles at them because, it was really unregulated. You have no idea where people are making edibles. You have no idea what's going into them. They could have poison in them for all anyone knows.
Mm-hmm.
So there was kind of like this like unspoken rule that you could sort of operate these dispensaries as long as you were only selling dried flower. So
Hey, that's a huge start. That's a
that's
very
just
huge
right.
start.
It's a
Yeah.
start, right? But one outcome of that was that all of the people who had been used to accessing edibles or vape carts or whatever other 2.0 product they had been used to getting in these dispensaries no longer had access, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got all kinds of people who are maybe patients but are using cannabis therapeutically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whether or not it's medicinal or recreational, whatever. Like, I believe it's all therapeutic use. So
Absolutely.
you now, right now, you have these people who can't access these products any longer when they were used to accessing them.
Mm-hmm.
So in response, there were two women in the Toronto area. Their names were Sarah Gillies and Lisa Campbell. They said, let's start they called them the green markets. They were like these sort of farmers markets for 2.0 products. So they didn't sell any dried flower, but you could get edibles, you could get topicals, you could get vape carts. So you
Mm-hmm.
could get the other products that were no longer available in the underground dispensaries in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband and I sort of looked at each other and said, like, we've been making edibles for ourselves and for friends and family for a while. Like,
Really?
yeah,
Do,
like we had been doing that just at home.
how do you make
Like,
edibles?
oh, but there's lots of ways. So primarily we would take, what we did in the very beginning is we would save our bud that we had already vaped. There's our AVB, already vaped bud. And knowing there was a bit of THC left in there and a lot of CBN, because you've heated up your THC, so there's some CBN left in there.
Mm-hmm.
We would take that and we would run it into oil in our slow cooker. So that's how we first started, was with this already vaped bud. And then we learned that you could take like food grade shatter, which, like, by food grade, I mean like nasty stuff that you probably wouldn't like vape
Okay.
or, dab.
Yeah.
But you could eat it. You could still eat it. So you could take food grade shatter, you could decarb it, and then you could put that into your edibles. Or you could take flour and you could run flour into oil and then you use oil or can butter, or, there's all these different ways
Huh.
of infusing edibles.
Huh.
And then distillate came on the scene and we could get access to distillate, and that you're really precise with your dosing right there. Now you know exactly what you're dosing your edibles at, right? So we'd been doing that for a while. We weren't scientific about it, but we'd been doing it enough to know how effective our products were and how, what sort of infusion methods would lead to different outcomes and things like that. So we said, let's start a brand. Like, let's start doing it. Let's sell these products.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why not? So that was how Fritz's Cannabis Company started. My husband said, let's name it this. I was like, I don't want to name it after myself. He was like, no, it's a good name. So I was like, all right. So
it's a catchy name. It's a very catchy name.
He was right. It is a good name.
Yeah.
So that's how Fritz's Cannabis Company was born. So that was, we started it in our kitchen and started making these products. And then, then we went to these farmers markets and we had gummies and cereal bars and brownies and oils and capsules and whatever else we could think of to make, we would make them. We, anytime you can make something with oil, great, no problem. Then I can turn it into an edible. So we made all kinds of products, and then it was such a great opportunity because it allowed me to connect like literally across the table from the person who was consuming the edible, right? I could speak to that customer. I could say, how are you going to use this? What are you using this for? What are you treating? How did you find it? What were the effects? What was your experience versus someone else's experience? So it gave me this like incredibly powerful firsthand knowledge and information about what the consumer was experiencing when they ate an edible. So it was, it was just an invaluable experience as an entrepreneur to be like across the table from your customer and hearing their feedback.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So how long were you the CEO of Fritz's Cannabis?
So my husband and I started that company in 2016. And we didn't really have labels in the beginning. We just kind of did whatever. Like my husband makes all the gummies. I made a lot of the other products, but he made all the gummies. He's
now gummies. Is it like the Lifesaver gummy kind of type deal?
That's like a gummy bear.
Okay, like a regular just gummy bear.
Yeah,
okay.
Like a Haribo gummy bear. Yeah.
Okay.
And so he was like the mad scientist in the kitchen who was developing new methods of infusion and cooking and all of things like that. And I'm very grounded and organized. So I was like, I will do all the grounded and organized work that needs to be done for the business. So when we had the opportunity to move to the regulated marketplace after Canada federally legalized weed in 2018.
So it is federally legalized in Canada.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. 2018, it became legalized. Okay. And so that we said like, okay, now let's get to the regulated market. That's what we want to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we started that transition in 2020, and that's when we had to put like official labels on our roles. So that's when I officially became the CEO of the company. And transition the company over, from the legacy market, from the underground market to the regulated marketplace in Canada. It's now an operating business in the regulated marketplace. It's a legal business in Canada. And so I stepped down from that role in December of 2022 because I love doing things for the first time, but once something is established, it's time for me to move on. So
next thing, let's get the next project going. Yeah.
The next project. And I found out that it's not really very much fun running a highly regulated edibles company. It's not nearly as much fun as doing it underground. So surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so there's a few things in your industry or in your bio here that ultimately helping me maintain a balanced and holistic manner. What kind of things helped you to get there? So, let me back up to what brought you to that point. What did you go through to get to that point?
Yeah. So, like I said, it wasn't as much fun running the business in the regulated marketplace as it was underground, right? When you're an entrepreneur and you're operating underground, you can do whatever you want to. There's no real rules, right? So, and so moving from that into an environment that was only rules, it's only regulations and rules that you're operating in. it was a big shift. And, like I said, I can do anything once. I'm happy to do anything one time. So I got there and got things set up in these rules. But I very quickly found that I was totally miserable. And it was a real shock, actually, because we had been operating this business since 2016, and I said, I saw this next step of moving to the regulated industry as this was going to be my opportunity to tell all these people, all these Canadians, about how amazing weed is, right? Like, it changed my life. It saved me. It rescued me. It made such a huge positive impact on my life. And I saw this moving our company to the regulated market as my opportunity to share that with other people, so that other people could learn about weed, right? And learn how powerful of a medicine it is, and what a powerful plant this is for the healing the quality of people's lives, right? And so I knew that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I could feel it. I could feel I was bringing the gospel to people. I was bringing the truth to people. So then why was I totally miserable? I would literally wake up in the morning and start crying. And then I would go to work and sit in my car and cry for 10 minutes before I went into the facility, and then come out at lunch and cry for another 10 minutes before I went back in to eat my lunch. Like, I was completely miserable. Yeah, like it was really bad, really bad. And like, my husband was like, we're not gonna live like this. Like, you have to do something different. Like, I appreciate that you're trying to do this and build this business, but like, you can't live like this. You can't be miserable. So we sort of decided together that I wasn't going to come into the facility anymore. I was going to run the company as much as possible from home. I was going to stay home and work from home while he went in, did the production, did the manufacturing, did all of that. And we would start to look for a new CEO, a new person who would be happy operating in a highly regulated industry. And so I had to then I had to figure out, okay, like, what's going on, right? Like, just like I did with my anxiety, I now had this new experience of mental health challenges that I needed to figure out what was going on for myself. So I went back to weed. Of course, I'm going to use weed to help me, create the space for myself. I use it in a ritualistic way that helps me say, okay, I'm going to take the time to sit and figure out what's going on. And then I started.
You said ritualistic. Could you explain that a little better?
Yeah. So for me, I think that cannabis is best consumed with intention. It works most powerfully for me when I have some intention before consuming it. Now, that could be getting high on a Tuesday night. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It could be treating my migraine. It could be, dealing with menstrual cramps. But in this instance, I decided that I was going to use cannabis in a sort of ritual to sit down with myself and my own intuition and tap into what was really going on. So I would smoke some weed, and then I would sit in meditation with my journal open and say, like, okay, whatever needs to come through from my higher self, I'm just going to be here and open and let it come through, right? And so cannabis really helps me create the space where I can do that. So one intention for me is to use it in a ritualistic way where I say, okay, I'm entering into this experience with this specific intention. I'm going to prepare my cannabis in this specific way that helps me stay focused on that intention and stay present in the moment with what I'm doing. And then I'm going to consume my cannabis, and then I'm going to engage in this specific activity afterwards while I'm, feeling high or feeling altered or whatever it is. So that, when I say a ritual or a ritualistic way, that's what I mean. It's really, for me, about entering into something with a lot of intention. So I began to sort of develop these rituals for myself. Some of them involved cannabis, some of them didn't. But a really important one became my morning, like my meaningful morning ritual. Right? Where I would sit and I have a gratitude practice. Okay, like, what are 3 things that I'm grateful for today? How am I feeling? Checking in with my emotions, checking in with my intuition, setting intentions for the day. So backing up just a little bit, by working at home while my husband was going into the facility and I'm managing at home, that travel time became time to myself. So I
Mm-hmm.
was able to bookend my day at the beginning of my day and the end of my day when my husband was traveling, and I normally would have been traveling with him, with these sort of very meaningful rituals where I was able to enter into this intentional sort of conversation with myself and say, like, okay, what's going on here? How can I solve this problem? How can I deal with what's really happening? And how can I begin to address how I'm feeling? And through that work, what I discovered was that my definition of success was totally wrong. My definition of success was to have this company that made millions of dollars every year and was, super successful and manufactured, 10 million gummies every year or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That was the definition of success that I was operating from. And it wasn't even true, right? For me, success was transitioning this company from the legacy market to the regulated market. Like I did that. That was a success, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone else who's done that. So by engaging sort of in these very meaningful and intentional rituals, I was able to start to uncover why I was feeling so bad and what I could do about it to fix it going forward.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So how long did it take you to develop these kind of rituals and to develop this kind of meaningful insight? Because, like with
Like,
meditation, for when people go start meditating and whatnot, it does take a little bit of a trial period to get used to getting into the meditation or the ritual.
yeah, I would say it probably took me about 12 to 18 months to
Okay.
really sort of like put together what worked for me. And like I would
Mm-hmm.
just try everything. I would read something online, people would be like, this thing made me feel better. And I'd be like, great, let me try it and see if it makes me
Mm-hmm.
feel better, right?
Yeah.
So I tried everything that I could. And I would say in about a year to 18 months, I was able to really sort of develop my own system that I now use every day. And that keeps me balanced between like this divine feminine being state and my divine masculine doing state so that I'm able to feel good and use that to propel myself forward and get stuff done in the world,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, it does. I do a little bit of that. Like I wake up and I have my affirmations and another post that says, or another picture that says, it's God's timing and will, not mine. And then something that I want this podcast to give me, or to
Hmm.
to buy me, or give me, or something. So I mean,
Yep,
everybody has their own little rituals and whatnot. And what works best for you is what works best for you, is how I
that's
look
right.
at it. And
I will say, I think you're really smart to be doing it in the morning, though, because I've been reading so much recently that the way we start our day, like with our
mm-hmm.
brain, that's how you set yourself up for your whole day. So if you're starting, if you immediately wake up and pick up your phone and you're like, okay, let me just look and see what,
Yeah.
I can get my dopamine pings with,
Yeah.
then that's how your brain's going to be all day. But if you wake up and you are doing your affirmations, have
Mm-hmm.
gratitude practice, whatever it is, you're setting yourself up for success the whole day. You're
Mm-hmm.
so smart to do it that way.
Yeah. It takes away a lot of the anxiety of the day.
Hmm.
It really
Yeah.
does. Now, when you were diagnosed, let me jump back real quick because I had
Hmm.
this question pop into my head. When you were diagnosed with the anxiety disorder, does your head just run 100 miles an hour all the time? Because
Yeah.
mine
It's
does the
that's
same
I,
thing. Yeah. Like, and cannabis was the one thing that got to slow down. Like, man, this is what the colors look like. Like, this is
hmm
nice.
hmm So I do have that same experience. That actually is
Yeah.
more for my ADHD, I think, which
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who are consuming cannabis are treating ADHD too, without even maybe knowing they have it,
Yeah.
right?
It just,
Because it does that exact thing for you. It just
mm-hmm.
lets your brain go, oh, like it's like putting like a weighted blanket on your thoughts,
Yeah.
right? You can be like, oh, okay, no,
Yep.
I can.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's all, it's, cannabis is awesome. And when I
It
first,
totally is.
yeah, when I first started smoking it, I was just like, why isn't this just a thing? Like this, but then again, like I live here in the States and I realize that the federal government is all over the pharmaceutical industry. So it's going to
Yeah,
take a while, even though the states are saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with cannabis. We haven't seen anything. Like, how many DUIs have I seen with cannabis?
right.
Not a lot.
Exactly.
How many times have I
Right.
heard people robbing banks or robbing everybody just for cannabis? None. You hear it
Not
all
many.
from
No.
the hard drugs or alcohol or
Yeah.
something of that nature.
Yep.
And and I'm glad that the states are starting to see that, and I'm glad that Canada federally legalized it. Um, and I do have a few questions about that because I have a few
Hmm.
friends that I game with that live in Canada, and they told me that they just order their cannabis all online and it just comes straight to
Hmm.
the door. When
Yep.
did that process start setting up? Now, and do you order it from specific dispensaries? Do you order it from like a federally regulated website or something of that nature?
Yep. So there's a few different systems.
Okay.
So every province, which a province is like a state, every province is going to have their own system. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in the beginning, most some provinces had phone like delivery. They
Mm-hmm.
did that in the beginning. Like you could actually go online to the provincial wholesaler's website and order the product, and it would either be delivered or mailed to you through the mail. So that happened. Most provinces, I think, had that in the beginning. You could order it through the mail, but you might have to wait a couple days. But then when COVID came around, a lot of the dispensaries said, this is not fair because you're not allowing people into our stores. So we can't sell any products because you're not allowing people into the store. You have to let us do delivery as well.
Mm-hmm.
So then a number of the provinces said, okay, the retail stores can do delivery as well, then fine. And then once COVID was over, they didn't roll it back. They allowed the stores to keep doing delivery. So there are, in most provinces now, there is some form of delivery that you can have. Just, you call your shop, or you may call the provincial wholesaler and retailer instead, and they will deliver directly to you. A few places you might have to just get it in the mail instead. But you absolutely can have that. Now, each province has its own wholesaler. So every single licensed producer, so anyone who's making regulated weed products, has to sell their product to the provincial wholesaler. So there's
Mm-hmm.
one body for each province. They purchase all the products, and then the retail shops will purchase through them. They become the wholesaler and the distributor.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it, there's one like wholesaler for each province, and then the shops and customers will be able to purchase through that wholesaler. It's a little bit convoluted. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if that made sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Absolutely. So on your bio here, it says you went into the cannabis education. What kind of things are you
Mhm.
doing with cannabis education? Because just to give you a setup, I went to college back in 2020, and the college I went to finally put out a cannabis degree.
Nice.
So, are there degrees in Canada? Are you licensed to teach or anything of that nature?
Great questions. So there are a number of, so in Canada, we have universities and colleges. And so a college is basically like a community college. It's like a 2-year degree college.
Mm-hmm.
So there are colleges here in Canada who do some cannabis certificates, things like it's mostly for growing and production.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing that is for a bud tender or someone who wants to be a cannabis educator. So we have programs around production and manufacturing and stuff like that. But there are no programs for retail workers who want to learn more about weed or about selling weed to people. So my background is in education. I used to be a middle school teacher in New
Mm-hmm.
Jersey. I used to teach American history. Like I love teaching.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my favorite things to do. So I was working at a university, at the University of Toronto in 2019, when I was approached by a cannabis retailer. Their name was Mihi. And they heard me talk about weed at a conference I was at, and they said, "We like the way you talk about weed. We want you to come talk about weed for us." And so I said, "Great,
Oh,
I will.
wow.
I'll do that." Yeah. So they hired me as their director of cannabis education.
Oh,
And so,
nice.
yep,
Congratulations.
thank you. That was maybe one of my favorite jobs I've ever had in my whole life. And
Mm-hmm.
so I took that role on, and I built out their bud tender education program.
Mm-hmm.
Their intention was to have, I think, 35 stores across Canada. So they needed a comprehensive bud tender education program. So I said, no problem. I built that out for them. Well, then COVID came around and they went under. because of COVID and a number of other reasons as well. The industry is difficult. It's very challenging. So
I feel like it's the face of the new generation coming up. You know,
yeah,
like it back when there was prohibition, it was back in the baby boomer era, and now we're
that's
coming up
right.
to Gen X and millennials, and it's like here's what we
The new,
like to do.
yeah,
So
right,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So let's make it accessible, right?
exactly.
Right. Um, so okay, so right, so COVID, so that store closed down, and then I began to work as a consultant for other retailers who were like, "Hey, we need a bud tender education program." So I was like, "Great, I'll put one together for you." So after I did a few more, I realized nobody's got a good bud tender education program out there, and I have like a really good skill set here for developing one.
Hmm.
So I built one myself in my closet during COVID. I like got a green screen and put it behind me and built this whole program and built an e-learning program that covers like everything bud tenders need to know about cannabis products, customer service, sales, the endocannabinoid system, everything they need to know. And I put together an e-learning program and an in-person program that I delivered to dispensaries as well. And so then in the middle, right after I did that, we actually started to move forward with Fritz's and get Fritz's into the regulated market. And so
Hmm.
then that I had no time to work on cannabis education. It was all focused on Fritz's, all focused on edibles. And then fast forward to the period of time where I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm miserable. I need to resign. And so when I was finally able to resign as the CEO of Fritz's, I took, some time to recover
Hmm.
from the mental health challenge that experience had presented to me. And then said, okay, great. Now I actually have time to focus on cannabis education, which is truly my passion. It's truly why I wanted to even get into edibles in the first place, is to try to bring information and education to people so they can use weed to make their life better. I'm a teacher at heart. I love teaching. And now I actually get to focus on delivering cannabis education to bud tenders, who are the people who will be able to teach everyone in the public about how to use cannabis with intention to live their own best life. Right.
Hmm.
So in like this way, I started to see that like, okay, I'm starting to come full circle and come back around to this thing that I got into weed to begin with, because I care so much about cannabis education and want everyone to know how to use it to make their life better. Like that's what I care about, right? I care
Hmm.
about people knowing how to use weed to make their life better. That's
Hmm.
what I want to do.
Hmm.
So now I'm getting back to this point where I'm able to focus full time on cannabis education. And on helping people get the skills that they need to work with their customers and sell them the right products so that they will be happy with their weed products and will use weed more and will make
Hmm.
their life better. Right.
Hmm. Oh
So,
yeah, absolutely.
I know I'm preaching to the choir. I
Yeah.
know, you know.
So I do have a few questions on about different cannabis products like Delta 8,
Yeah.
Delta
Yeah.
10. How do you feel about Delta 8? Because I've chiefed on a few Delta 8 pens, and I personally like them. I'd have to say if someone getting into it, I'd start there. If you've never smoked weed in your life, I would start there. That's my opinion, but I would love to hear yours.
Interesting. Okay. I've never heard anyone give that opinion before. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
They actually so here is there's Delta 8. I had never heard of Delta 10 until you just mentioned it,
Mm-hmm.
actually. And there's something else called THCO, which is another sort of synthetic THC
Mm-hmm.
cannabinoid. And so my edibles company, we were actually going to experiment with them because
Mm-hmm.
our edibles are limited to 10 milligrams per package here in Canada, which really limits what producers can do. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of consumers who don't want to spend $5 on 10 milligrams. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they need a lot more. So
Yeah.
one way that we looked at getting around that was putting other cannabinoids in the product. We said, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can only put 10 milligrams of Delta 9 in here, but what if I put, 20 milligrams of Delta 8? Or what if I put 25 milligrams of THCO in here?
Mm-hmm.
Then a customer will have, a more intense experience that they're looking for, and I'm still within my legal limits.
Mm-hmm.
So we tried, so in Canada, you have to submit products well in advance of when you're allowed to manufacture or send them to market. You have to submit
Mm-hmm.
them for like approval. So we submitted them for approval, and the guidance that came back said that they would not be accepting any products that were made with Delta 8 or THCO or any of these other sort of novel cannabinoids that hadn't really been studied and were being used as a substitute for THC to get
Mm-hmm.
around these rules. So because of that, we don't have a lot of Delta 8 products or these other products available in Canada, because anything in the underground just is going to have Delta 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so Delta 8 is a way to sort of get around the legality of
Yeah.
Delta 9.
Yeah.
So I haven't really tried them. So I can't speak to the experience of them.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get them and they work for you, I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't see anything wrong with it, but I don't know much about those cannabinoids specifically because of that.
So, what is THCO? I've never heard of this.
It's this sort of, it's, I think, a synthetic THC. I don't know if it's a derivative. It's a molecule that's very similar to THC, but it's slightly different. Like, it's chemically altered so that it's not legally exactly the same as Delta 9 THC. But I think it actually may be more potent in the way that you experience it
Okay.
than regular THC. So it's just another way sort of of getting around the legality of THC. I think it was like the early 2000s that someone first put the recipe for it up, like on Arrowwood or something. So it's, been around for maybe 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it is.
Okay. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you see the cannabis industry going in the next, let's just long shot it and say 20 years?
So I think I mentioned this before, but I truly believe that the cannabis consumer of the future is one who consumes with intention.
Mm-hmm.
I really, and like I said, getting high is every bit as much of a valid intention as is any number of medical or health reasons that you might use cannabis, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are so many benefits to cannabis. Stress relief and relaxation is a big and important one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that as we move into, and like you said earlier, like this is like the millennials and Gen Z, they're like, no, I think that like, no, we do weed. Like we like weed.
Yeah,
This is part of our ethos. This is who
yeah.
we are. Right.
Well,
So I think that
they're growing
more and more.
Yeah, they're growing
Go ahead.
up. They're growing up with states or Canada
Right.
being federally legal, states making it
Right.
legalized. Yeah, they're growing up in
Exactly.
that way.
It's normalized, right?
Yeah, normalized. There.
And so
Perfect.
the more that it's normalized, the more normal it will become, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people will be like, oh, you know what? I don't feel good. I'm just going to smoke a joint because it, helps me feel more like myself. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? I'm experiencing, pain after I worked out. I'm just going to use this roll-on stick to make my
Mm-hmm.
muscles feel less inflamed, right? So there's so many different ways of using cannabis for like health and wellness benefits that I really believe that as time goes on and as we move into the future, and maybe even within 20 years, we're going to start to see people accessing cannabis for all kinds of different reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
For all kinds of different use cases, not just for getting high, which is fine and is valid, but there's so many other ways to use cannabis as well. Like I don't sleep without weed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I wake up all the time in the night if I don't have weed before I go to bed. And my husband will make me oils, and that's what I take before I go to bed. And it keeps me asleep and it helps me fall asleep, right? Or if, I get together with my girlfriends on a Saturday afternoon, and you know what? We don't want to drink beers, but we just want to sit around and smoke joints outside in the backyard, like because it's fun and relaxing, and that's what we do. So I think that we're just going to see more and more and more of that, and weed will just become a normal, everyday part of people's lives as it becomes normalized, and as people like you and me continue to just use it as part of our daily lives, and other people can see that, right? So, like my mom. So like I said in the beginning, I didn't grow up with weed. Like that wasn't the thing that people around me did. It wasn't something that I was exposed to. And so I did not believe that my mom would ever consume cannabis. Even when I got into this industry and it was, so instrumental in my mental health, I was like, my mom will never do this. And then a few years ago, so my mom has ulcerative colitis, so a gut disorder, bowel disease.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been on medications for that gut disease since I was a kid. So for like 30 years, I can remember her always being on these medications. And a couple years ago, she called me and she said, I have to tell you, what's going on with my health. She doesn't, we don't talk a lot about our personal lives, but if my parents have something going on with their health, they'll call and tell us kids so that like if they die, we know why or whatever. So she always tells me what's going on with her health. So she called me up and she said, I got to let you know what's going on here. I've been to the doctor and they've done all my blood work and they've done all my levels. And it looks like I'm going to have to go on kidney dialysis because my prescription medications have like shot my kidneys over the years. Right. And like, she's like really bad. And I was like, I don't accept this. We're not going to do that. We're going to find a solution. So I got my mom some edibles that have no THC, but they have CBD and CBG in them.
Now, what's the G?
So CBG is known as like the stem cell cannabinoid. So in the cannabis plant, all of the cannabinoids start out as CBG, and then different processes happen in the plant, and they can become CBD, they can become THC, they can become different cannabinoids that you can find in the cannabis plant, but they all start out as CBG. So the more that we learn about CBG, the more we find that it is highly medicinal. It's not psychoactive. It doesn't cause you to be altered at all, but it's very, very medicinal. And so I had been reading about CBG, and I knew that it had been used for gut disorders, that they had been doing some experiments on people who have gut disorders in CBG, and they'd been seeing positive results. So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I found her an edible that had CBD and CBG in it. And I said, you're going to take this every day, like a vitamin. And she started taking that every day, like a vitamin. And 3 months later, she called me and she said, I've been to the doctor. All of my levels are back to normal. My kidney levels are back to normal. My liver levels are back to normal. I not only don't have to go on dialysis, but I actually am stopping my prescription medication that I've been taking for 30 years because everything is back to normal. So not only did it heal her kidneys, but it healed her gut disorder that she'd been experiencing for 30 years. She doesn't have to take prescription medication anymore. She just takes a gummy once a day. She takes this gummy with CBD and CBG in it, right? And it has improved the quality of her life so much. So yes, cannabis is great. Getting high is great. I love getting high. But for me, this is so much more than that. This is about helping people recover, helping people improve the quality of their life, helping people get off prescription medications, avoid dialysis. This plant is magical. It is miraculous. And the more I'm able to share that with people, the happier I'm going to be about it.
I 100% agree with you. Completely 100% agree with you. So Tabitha, where can we find you? On social media, on the internet?
You can find me. You can find me all over. You can find me online. You can find my cannabis website at penelopeswrist.com. So that's where it's about using cannabis with intention. You can find my edibles company at fritz's.ca. So FRITZS.ca. You can find, so I do a lot of, I do tarot card readings and I do spiritual coaching and intuitive work with the experiences that I've been through. So I help other people with similar experiences. You can find that at tabithafritz.com. And then you can find me on social media at Penelope's Wrist.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and bringing some very positive and a lot of information for the cannabis community.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I love sharing the gospel of weed.
You have yourself a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.